So good morning. That was obviously a very powerful speech by Emma. As an accountant, I have heard or experienced her story far too many times, but at least your family had their act together, which is unlike some of the families I've met over time. So the focus of this forum today is on the next generation of leaders. So the room is full of guys who lift weights, enter Ironman contests, look buff, and think they're going to live forever. The women in this room are super women, working in the family business, raising kids, and running marathons. You all feel immortal and indestructible. Some of you are probably thinking Emma's story is a cautionary tale, but unlikely to happen to you. So let me reframe this so that it may hit home even if Emma's story didn't. I had a friend die skiing in Switzerland in his early 20s. I had a friend I played baseball with die rounding third base in his 30s. A friend of my wife's was on vacation in London and unfortunately walked across the street the wrong way and was killed in his 40s. A client's father was picking apples for his children and fell off the tree and died in his early 40s. Sorry about that. My own father fell asleep in a sauna at 54 and died. That is 5 people in my small circle who all died by weird circumstances, not even taking into account things as potential heart attacks, cancer, etc. Yet, because you feel immortal when you are young, you often ignore many of your family business, financial, and estate issues, and when something goes bad, your family is left with a financial disaster at the time of grieving. Unfortunately, as I have noted, tragedy can strike at any time, and as I noted, in some strange circumstances. The question I have for you is, if something bad was to happen to you, are your finances, both personal and business-wise, in order? If you're like most people, the answer is unfortunately no. Hopefully my discussion today will provide the impetus for you to start organizing your financial affairs. To determine if your finances are in shape, I suggest you stress test your own death. And by that I mean test, if you were hit by a car today, do you have everything in order, personally and business-wise, for your spouse and your family? Since you're probably thinking to yourself, this accountant guy is really morbid, I'm going to inform you of a potential side benefit of stress testing your finances. To the men in the audience, if you have to attend the ballet, just to tell your wife, you first have to stress test your death, and I think you'll be out of the ballet for that night. Ladies, if your guy's a little frisky and you want a night off, say, okay, honey, let's stress test our death tonight, and I think you'll have the night off. Okay, so let's talk about stress testing your death. As discussed, stress testing your finances determines your financial readiness if you were to die or become ill. When meeting with spouses, often I ask the non-financial spouse, if your spouse died, what would you know? Would you know where all your assets are, and are they listed anywhere? And the answer is almost no. And that's because most spouses give little thought to what would happen if one of them passed away unexpectedly. The same thing applies, as Emma stated, to the family business. At the end of the day, stress testing your death and making sure everything is in order is purely a selfless act. So what is a personal stress test? Well, it includes the things you would typically think about: wills, powers of attorneys, insurance. But there's some strange things that you may not think about: funeral arrangements, in this day and age, digital assets, everybody's favorite loyalty points, and undisclosed assets, which create a huge mess in some cases. So the obvious question is, do you have a will? Unbelievably, 53% of Canadians do not have a will. 46% of younger people do not have a will because they think they're either too young or do not have enough assets to even have a will. Hopefully the people in this room, because you have small businesses, have proper advice and at least have a will. But even if you do have a will, that leads to the next thing: is your will up to date? It has been my experience as an accountant that people procrastinate. They don't want to accept their mortality. I'll meet a client and talk about, is your will up to date? When's the last time you've done it? Well, I did it 10 years ago. They come back, so I tell them, okay, go get your will updated. They come back next year. So did you get your will updated? Nah, I didn't do it. This goes on and on for 5, 10 years. This even happened in my own family where my father, a year before he died, him and my mother were putting a will together. Their initial will was when they were 25 years old and had 2 cents to their name, and the will was basically pretty, you could have got it off the internet. And they were putting together a will with family trust and one of those fancy organizations that Emma showed you. And It sat on my mother's dresser for a year because every time they had to deal with it, my mom said, I don't really want to deal with this, and she didn't like the concept of, potentially considering that she could die. And, what happens? Unfortunately, my father dies, and the will is null and void because it was never signed, and they went back to the will that they had when they were 25 years old. Now, in my case as the executor, that was actually easy because it made things simple, but that was not exactly my father's intention. Same thing for anybody here, where you're the next generation. A lot of you now have ownership and shares in your family business. That's a significant change, so that should be addressed, and you should all update your wills. There's also been a lot of recent changes in the Income Tax Act that would address wills even if they are up to date. A lot of you may have spousal trusts in your will, which were great. You used to be able to income split with the spousal trust for as long as the spousal trust was in existence. However, new laws state now that spousal trust will only have low tax rates for 3 years. So a lot of tax planning has gone out of the window. You may still want to keep that spousal trust, but it's not as effective as it once was. A lot of you may have blended families. The new tax laws really can cause some havoc in the way wills are structured, so you may again want to check with your lawyers whether your will needs to be updated. If anybody has a disabled child and they've built in some structure into their will for disabled children, it's not that the changes are negative, but they've changed certain terms and things that happen, so again, you would have to update your will. I hope everybody here knows that you can have a secondary will for your private corporation shares, so it's not subject to probate. Unbelievable, even though I tell all my clients you should have that. I'd say 50% still only do, even when I bang them over the head. So hopefully everybody does, and if you don't, get one. A key here, and I'll have this on every page, so I'll just say it once, is does your spouse, and when I say spouse, that will count for partner or whatever relationship you have. I'm just not going to keep saying spouse and partner. So does your spouse know where to find a copy of your will or whatever we're talking about? And does your spouse know the name of the person, the lawyer, who drafted your will? Powers of attorney, I think everybody knows here, you should have one for financial affairs. You should also have one for health care. I'm updating my will now currently because my firm had merged with BDO on January 1st, and I have a little bit of a different structure. And when I was speaking to my estate lawyer, I asked her, well, do I have to even bother with the powers of attorney? And she said, no, they're probably still in place, but there is new terminology. So if you are going to change your will or update your will, you might as well get the new terminology into your new powers of attorney. Legal documents, beneficiaries. This is a fun one. So first of all, you should have a list of your beneficiaries for your RSPs, insurance policies, etc., and ensure they're updated. I must have had at least 5-6 circumstances where people have separated, and when I'm reviewing the spouse who's my client's RSP or insurance or their will, the beneficiaries are still their ex-spouse. Not a great situation, and especially, unfortunately, if you were to die, somebody you didn't want to give a cent to is now getting everything. If we want to get to current events, some of you may have heard the unfortunate saga of Lamar Odom, who used to be an NBA All-Star with the Los Angeles Lakers. He decided to have a fun weekend at a legal brothel in the United States in Las Vegas, had a little bit too much of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and unfortunately went into a severe coma, and hopefully he's going to live, but he's still sort of uncertain. But he was married to Khloe Kardashian, so the Kardashians always somehow fit into everything. And according to my great source of TMZ, Lamar did not update his will, and if he actually was to pass away, Khloe will get everything, and I don't think that was his intention at the time, seeing that they had divorced. Insurance, everybody hates to pay life insurance, but you need it. It's used to pay off your debts, pay your children's education, and enable your spouse and your children to live in a style you're accustomed to. So, how much insurance do you need? Well, for everybody it's different, but one thing I find is when I do financial planning for my clients, I say, okay, can you give me a budget of what you spend a year? And most people have no clue of what they actually spend a year. So I say, humor me and, tell me what you think. Well, I spend $15,000 or $20,000 a month or whatever number they come up with. I say, okay, now let's just, for 2 months, just track your spending. And then they come back and they go, well, it was more like $40,000 or $50,000, right? So one of the things that I think a lot of you in this room is you probably have no clue how much you really spend. And that's a key for your life insurance. So you got to have a handle on how much actually you would need if, God forbid, you die. So, if you think you're spending $15,000 a month and you're multiplying that over a certain number of years for your insurance, that's a lot different number than if you're actually spending $50,000 a month. So just try and get a realistic feel for how much money you actually need to continue your lifestyle if, God forbid, you were to pass away. A really important thing is to prepare a summary of all your insurance policies. Personally, I have an Excel spreadsheet I've created, has the policy number, insurance company, type of insurance, value of insurance. Really simple document, but it's a great document. I just put it in, I personally have just put one copy in the safety deposit box, and also we all have those huge binders that your insurance agent gives you when you sign a policy. So I've just stuck it at the top, and it's sitting there. But that way, your spouse is totally aware of where everything is, and it's a nice, easy way to keep track of everything. Funerals. I'm talking about such fun things today. So some of you may have actually prepaid a funeral, so it would be nice to actually document somewhere that you have done that and where you are going to be buried. Some of you may have wishes for the future. You want to make sure that's true. So, for example, me, I'm a golfer. I want my ashes spread over Pebble Beach. The only problem for me is probably with the wind at Pebble Beach, my ashes will slice right like my drive, but that's another story. What you also want to do is ensure your spouse is aware of where the information is stored. So something that is, a really new topic and really has come around the last 5 years or so is the digital world. We all have 1,000 passwords. We can't remember what any of them are. So one of the things you could do, what you want to do is have a list of passwords. The question is, do you want to give that list of passwords to your spouse? Some people may, some people don't. But at least have a list somewhere in a safety deposit box or somewhere so it's available to everybody else. Some of you, or you may have known people that actually owned domain names. 15 years ago, you could have had a domain name that was worth $100,000 per name. So, that's a huge asset. The typical things that most of us have, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, these photo sharing accounts, they're not financial assets, but, what happens to those sites? So you want to have at least passwords and consider what would happen to those sites. And some of them are easy to close down. Some of them are actually very hard to close down. So you want to deal with that. What we also don't think about is we have tons of information on our computers and our phones, and some of the file information has some value. So how do you deal with that? Loyalty points. Man, I think my clients would do anything to get loyalty points. I'm buying an $800,000 piece of equipment. Can I put it on my Visa? Everything for my wife is a loyalty point. Longos. Got points. Anyways. Consider making a list of all your loyalty programs you are enrolled in and the number that you've been assigned. A lot of programs allow actually a transfer of those loyalty points to a member on death, but you just want to have a list of those things. Undisclosed assets, this is actually a pretty fun one. So some people have accounts, safety deposit boxes, safes, mattresses, where they have assets that their spouses aren't aware of. So there could be various reasons why you wouldn't want to tell your spouse. You have a bad marriage. You like a slush fund that you don't want your spouse to know about, so you can go, spend some money that they don't know about. Or in a worst case, you have a cash business and it's what we would call not reported income. So what you want to do is make sure somebody at least has a clue about some of these things, especially if you sort of put them somewhere where you don't know where anybody's going to find them. You may want to tell your best friend, your brother, or somebody you actually trust, or your business partner who knows you have these things. But the problem is, I don't think people actually consider what could happen when they have these. So I don't know if anybody's ever been an executor, but the first thing you do when you're executor is you have to go open a bank account, and a bank representative takes you to the safety deposit box, and the bank representative is sitting there with a pen and a pencil and writing everything that's in there, and you open up a safety deposit box and there's $500,000 of cash there. That is not a good thing. So not only is it a good thing because the bank person is seeing that and God knows what they're going to do with that information, but you've now put your executors in a huge issue. In Ontario, there's a whole bunch of new laws for executors and their responsibilities. So that is a huge issue for your executor in Ontario from a probate point of view. And now what do you do for tax? If you open up a safety deposit box or go in someone's mattress and there's a ton of cash, well, the executor has to sign off and get a clearance certificate at the end. So is this unreported income? Is this person just somebody who didn't trust the banks and wanted to put cash in there? So you have some massively huge issues. Administration. So you want to make sure you have emergency contact lists for doctors, lawyers, accountants, advisors, bankers, and anybody else you have. The key point here is introduce your spouse to these people while you're alive. The worst thing that could ever happen is, unfortunately, you die suddenly and your spouse has this list but has no clue who these people are. If you take your spouse to various meetings over time, there's a comfort level, and at a time of grieving, it's a lot easier for your spouse to call up these people if they already have a relationship and the advisor also knows who you are. So I've talked about all these things that you should do. You need something to consolidate it. So what I suggest is you prepare an information checklist or an estate organizer for your executor. If you have a financial planner or investment advisor, they may have something they've already created. You could probably find one online. If you really can't find anything that you like, I've actually created one for my clients that's a fillable one, and by fillable I mean if you send it to you, it's on your computer, you actually can type into it and it stays there for till the next time you want to change it. But you need to have a document. You do that document, you put it in your safety deposit box or give it to your lawyer or your best friend. Now everything is there and simple. God forbid something happens to you, at least everything is there. No one has to go searching. There's nothing worse than a hide and seek when somebody has died and you're trying to find their assets. So Emma talked very well about a lot of these situations, but I'm going to quickly talk about stress testing your business, shareholder agreements, and succession planning. I'd like to hope most people here who are not the sole owners of their company actually have shareholders agreement, and you would think that would be pretty standard, but unfortunately, in my experience, I found there's been a ton of clients I've had that, I tell them to do shareholders agreement, but they say, we're just starting our business, it's not established, or, whatever, we don't have the money. And then 5 years later, when they're established, and I tell them to do it, well, yeah, we'll get around to it. Suddenly, it's 10 years later, and they have no shareholder agreement. So hopefully nobody here is in that situation, but if you don't have a shareholder agreement, make sure you get one, and make sure it's up to date. And are the buy-sell terms still relevant? So for shareholder agreements, often there's an insurance policy to fund the buy and sell. The problem is a lot of people start off with a business, they have insurance set up, and the business is worth a couple $1 million, but 10 or 15 years later, it's worth $20 million. Now you have insurance worth $2 million to try and buy out someone's share of, let's say, $10 million. It doesn't exactly work too well. So at the time you're getting insurance and you're probably younger, it's probably better to overinsure to start with. And then it's probably, you want to revisit this issue if your business has really grown in value. Hopefully you can get more insurance and bump up that insurance. One thing that you may just want to check with your agreement, assuming you have one, is a lot of agreements are based on, God forbid, one of the partners dies, their shares are redeemed, they pay a dividend up to the surviving spouse or the company that's left. I've seen agreements where the lawyers have left out that dividend is tax-free. So when you die and an insurance policy is paid out, you get something called a capital dividend that can always flow at tax-free. I've seen unfortunately, some situations where shareholders didn't necessarily love each other by the time this happened, and the agreement doesn't actually state that the capital dividend flows up as part of the redemption, and the surviving shareholder decides to pay out cash that is taxable to the survivor. So you want to make sure that your insurance policy flows through that. The proceeds will be paid out when you redeem the shares as a capital dividend, so everything flows out tax-free to the surviving shareholder. Succession planning. I've stolen this from a Success Care. Some of you may have heard Grant Robinson or Jeff Noble speak over the years, and they always say, one day you will sell. It's either going to be voluntarily or involuntary because of a death or ill health. I think as Emma stated, her father actually had a great plan. May have had some gaps, but at least it was started. So you want to ensure the succession plan is in place and the transition is documented in case of death or illness. However, what if a succession plan is not in place? And if I had to take a guess, I'd bet half the people here probably don't even have a succession plan. So what you need to do is at least stress test your hopeful succession plan through a fire drill. The fire drill would ask, what would happen if your estate took effect tomorrow? What would happen to your business, including key stakeholders, families, and employees? From the fire drill, you create a contingency plan that needs to be put in place and documented until a proper transition plan is completed. Obviously, in Emma's case, where her father had actually had the foresight to think about it, it was still a tough go to get that done. So only imagine if you actually haven't even put that in place. So if you don't have this, you should start doing it and at least try and create something that would be there, God forbid you die, till you actually get your succession plan in place. So what are the key takeaways from today? Number one, ensure your finances are in order. And number two, ensure they're documented in some manner in either a checklist or some kind of estate organizer. Thank you.